Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Liliana Hernandez. I am a clinical director here at Children's Institute, and I am here for a conversation that I'm very excited to have. We're going to be talking about books, we're going to be talking about mental health, and we will see where that conversation takes us.
Yes, I'm Kelly Wong, the Director of Intensive Behavioral Health at Children's Institute, and our valued guest.
My name is Michael Threets. I am the library's biggest fan, according to myself. I am PBS's resident librarian. I am a library kid, a homeschool kid, a PBS kid, the cat dad of 2 wonderful cats, and I am a mental health advocate.
I'm really excited for this conversation, not only as a professional, right, but as a mother of 2 preschoolers. Sure. So we're going to get into some questions that we have for you.
Sounds good.
Michael, can you tell us about a book from your childhood that helped you feel seen?
To help me feel seen, that's a great question. I think probably the best book that made me feel seen as a kid, the first book where I saw myself reflected in the cover of a book, in the content of the story, was Bud Not Buddy by Christopher Paul Curtis. I just love the history of the story, and I just love that there was a brown boy on the cover of the book.
Yeah.
I read so many books. I read Beverly Cleary, I read Lewis Sacker, Chronicles of Narnia, Matt Christopher books, Goosebumps, Junie Bad and Bougie Jones, all sorts of different books. But Bud Not Buddy was the first book where I was like, hey, I already love books. I'm trying to read every single book in the children's section of the library. But Bud Not Buddy was the first time I was like, hey, I didn't know I could be in books too.
That's beautiful. That's such a special moment and realization, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So, Michael, why do you believe that books are such powerful tools for mental health, especially for young children?
I think books are such a valuable tool for kids, for teens, for adults when it comes to mental health. I think oftentimes when we talk about mental health, we talk about behavioral health, we think that it's just a problem or a struggle that adults have, but I'm sure as you both know, it happens at all ages. I think being a librarian, I saw at least 6 kids from being a children's librarian to being a supervising librarian who expressed to me and my staff not wanting to be alive in the world, and thank goodness all of those kids are still in the world. They're still visiting libraries. They're even starting to thrive and move forward with what they want to be in life. And I believe that they did it through books. They did it through book joy, through not having to read at an AR level, but just saying, this is the book I like. I want to read Raina Telgemeier 1,000 times. I want to read Dogman 1,000 times. As much as their grown-ups are probably very upset that they keep on reading Dogman over and over and over again, they probably got bored very quickly. But I think those books are just so special for mental health, just finding joy in books, because oftentimes when we're struggling with our mental health, even if we're surrounded by family, surrounded by friends, surrounded by people who care about us, we so often think that we're alone, we think that we're alienated and forgotten. But books say, here we are whenever you need us, all times of the day. If you're reading at school, if you're reading at home, if you're reading with the light on in your bedroom when you're supposed to be sleeping, all those characters are still there for us. I think for me, I had a hard time making friends as a kid. And I remember book characters being my very first friends. Matilda, Ramona and Beezus, Henry Huggins, Ralph S. Mouse. All those characters, when I didn't have any friends, they were my friends. And I think that's what books do for mental health, is they're the friends when we don't think we have anybody there for us.
Such a nice perspective, right? Like just really talking about feeling seen in a book, represented, and even just safe in like the consistency of a book always being there for you.
Absolutely.
Thank you for sharing.
Of course.
Yeah, kind of like jumping on that. I know you mentioned how books was an opportunity to connect and to have a safe space for yourself. And so I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of the roles that stories play in helping kids deal with like big feelings, whether it's happiness or sadness or fears? I'm kind of curious about your thoughts there.
Could you repeat your full question? I'm so sorry, I didn't hear the first part.
Yeah, what role do you think stories play in helping kids process big feelings like fear or happiness or sadness?
Oh, that's such a great question. I think books do such a good job of addressing every single emotion, every single feeling without us really knowing it. I think I'm often asked by grown-ups, by teachers, by educators, by professionals, what books help 5-year-olds tackle grief, tackle loss of a pet, loss of a parent, loss of a grandparent, getting ready for school, all those sorts of very specific questions. And I love that there are so many different book lists out there that address all those different things. But I think what's spectacular market about so many books is they cover every single feeling just by existing. I think that's just by being able to be read, be saying, you know what, it's okay if you're autistic, if you're dyslexic, if you have ADHD, you can try your best to read this story. So I think even if books don't necessarily address grief, if they don't address sadness, if they don't address depression, they're still there when that child, when that person is experiencing those feelings, those emotions, and they can use that book as either as a crutch, as a distraction tool, or as a way to put their emotions, their feelings into that book. For example, if they're reading aloud to their grown-up, they can read aloud with anger, they can read aloud and then talk about grief. But there are also just so many different books that do target those subjects specifically, and I think that's so cool and that's so great, because for a long time, educators and librarians have been very frightened to write books and to publish books and to release books to talk about these feelings. But I think when we talk about kids, we're like, oh, they're safe, they don't have to deal with adult problems, we don't want to bring this up right now. But kids are suffering from these things from such an early age. So the more often that authors and illustrators are brave enough to create these stories that target those things that you talked about specifically, the better we can have these open discussions and show kids it's okay to address big feelings, big emotions before it gets too late. I'm a big fan of Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is one of my heroes, and he always said feelings are mentionable and manageable, and I think that's exactly what books are.
Okay, wow, like I think that's so beautiful the way you describe how books not only allows the kids to also identify emotions, but to also release it and share it with others. It's such a beautiful way to describe it.
It made me think of even just processing outside of like the big emotion, right? As a mother to two preschoolers, sometimes I use a book in the moment, but also in like retrospect to sort of just identify like that's what you were experiencing, even if we're not dealing with that challenge anymore, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Is there any tools that you both see as professionals in behavioral health and wellness for helping kids who are reluctant to read, or just being able to show them with whatever they're dealing with when it comes to wellness?
It's a question about, apologies, it's
No,
a
no.
question about when they don't want to pick up a book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Just like different tools and
Yeah.
resources that you see in
Yeah.
kids who are struggling
Yeah.
with wellness, with their behavior, just like ways to get them to target their own behavior.
I think it's helpful to just make a book fun rather than forced, right? So I definitely, try to assign reading time at home, but if they don't want to do it, that's
Sure.
okay. And reading can take form in different ways. Sometimes it's even writing our own social story,
Yeah.
right? And I think that that's such a powerful tool for young children to write a story, to represent exactly what the experience is and go through that and even draw pictures to their story. I also really believe that audiobooks are great. Like my kids, a plug for Yodo Player, right? Like my kids love a little Yodo Player
Yes.
where they're in control of what card goes in there and what they're listening to.
Yeah, and to kind of add to that, like one of the things I think about, what are children's way of communication? That's play, especially young
Yes.
kids. And so like how, not only like kind of Lily, what you said about making books fun, is like, one of the things I love doing with kids is like bring out the puppets. Like let's be the characters in the book, and let's act it out, let's play it out. And that's really how kids learn, is through play, through imagination, and that's how they learn. And sometimes even for older kids too, so the play becomes such a big important piece with kids learning. Their imagination goes
Yes.
free, and it allows them to also just reconnect with the characters in the book themselves.
Yes, I love that. Yeah, I think play is so eternal. It's so forever. Not to get off topic, but I mean, I'm a big sports fan. My mom is a PE teacher as an educator for a high school. And when we talk about play, it's like play goes into adulthood. It's all of our. I'm a big sports fan, so it's like people like Steph Curry, Kobe Bryant. They're just adults who are still playing way into adulthood. They're just playing the same game that little kids do. So play is not something that just for kids. It helps all of us address our emotions and feelings just at different stages of life.
So the other thing I have kind of curious about is like, in your perspective, like what are some of the criteria that you use when you recommend books for others, especially when focusing on emotional resilience and well-being?
And so many great questions. I think I really like what you talked about making books fun. And I think I often talk about library joy. I talk about book joy. And so often I don't even know what those terms mean that I say when I say them. I've said them a Guinness Book of World Records amount of times. I think that they mean the most to me. And when I talk about the criteria and recommending books, I always like to talk with the kid themselves. Sometimes they're not there, but I really want to make them a part of the journey in finding books for them. So I like to ask them questions like, what do you like to do? What do you like to read? What have you liked to read before? And so often they're like, oh, I don't like to read at all. Reading's not fun. Reading's not cool, which so many more kids are thinking reading is cool now. And then I think early on as being a children's librarian, I recognize that kids and teenagers tend to wear what they love on their person. So they'll wear Spider-Man on their hats. They'll wear their favorite team's jersey. They'll wear manga and anime shirts and monsters and dragons and princesses and Disney characters. So when I'm making recommendations, I look at their person, I look at what they're wearing, what's on their backpack, and I say, oh, well, did you know that there's probably a book about dragons? There's a book about princesses. There is manga. There is anime. There are graphic novels. And I start the process from there, and they're like, oh, maybe reading is for me. But I think that's really the fear for so many kids. When these grown-ups and these parents come to librarians and educators saying, what about this book for this? What can they read? Is they're worried about looking cool. And so often they're worried about their own progress in reading. If they're at third grade, they don't think they're at a third grade reading level. If they're in seventh grade even, they're not at a seventh grade reading level. And it's getting that heart and saying, it's okay wherever you're at. We can find a book for you. So for me, I don't like to make too many bold statement book recommendations. I like to just work with the kids, work with the grown-ups, say audiobooks do count as real reading. Graphic novels do count as real reading because everybody learns a different way. In the same way that everyone learns a different way, everyone reads a different way. Audiobooks are my favorite format of reading. And that's why I introduced Hoopla Digital. I introduced Libby. I introduced Yodo Players. These different things to say, yes, you know what? Maybe you're at a different stage of your reading journey. And then we get there, and then I start saying, okay, here's this book. Help them log on to the library website and say, you know what? You really liked Dogman. You really liked Diary of a Wimpy Kid. You really liked Guts by Rand Tugemeyer. New Kid by Jerry Craft. Here are all these read-alikes for all these different books. So I think it's a constant conversation with these kids. And I think if you're going to truly make book recommendations for kids, you have to focus it on the individual. And even if sometimes I'll get messages on social media and people will say, what about these kind of books for my fourth grade girl? And I'm like, well, first of all, I don't believe in books being for girls, being for boys. I think every book is for every single person to be able to choose those books. I grew up reading Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew. So getting into those topics and saying, here's where we are, let's have a conversation. And especially for those people to utilize their local librarian, because every library has a different collection, and just maximizing their efforts, their resources, and their researchability.
I love the idea of just meeting the kids where they are and where their interests are. It reminds me a little bit like when I first started reading, when I really got into books was in third grade. And that's because I was bored and there was nothing else to do, went to the bookstore and picked up a Goosebumps Choose Your Own Adventure. And I remember somehow that transformed reading to me, because before I never loved it, didn't like it, and somehow just being able to choose the ending that I wanted. And then, or the random endings you kind of get, somehow just really changed books and reading for me, and then after that, it's been like a bookworm ever since then. So I think that's what you're tuning into, choosing what catches a kid's attention and what their interests are. And I think definitely books have definitely been in the last couple of years been embedded in pop culture, because I love the idea of looking at shirts and things that they're wearing and how that might inform in some of the reading opportunities.
Yes.
I like the parallels in mental health, right? The work is so individualized and about meeting a person where they're at, and that's how you're talking about books, which is obviously feels good to me as a psychologist. And it's also making me think of, that's kind of where I'm realizing I am as a mom too, right? Trying to bring books home. And my kids happen to be really into, well, one in particular is very into cats and princesses. I just discovered there is a whole series of books on a kitty princess.
Yes.
Perfect. Just the world is our oyster with books.
They're all out there in those different formats for different ages. If you like a book, it's probably out there in one library, in one bookstore. And I think it's even special you talked about your kids writing, say in times for them to write, is if there's not a book out there for them, if there's cats and princesses, maybe it's dogs and princesses, and there's no dog princess series, then they can write the story themselves and they can become authors and illustrators.
I love that.
And it's all out there. I think sometimes that's how you get kids hooked on reading, is say, write a story yourself. And they're like, I don't want to write. I don't like my handwriting. It's like, okay, well then you tell me the story, and you as a grown-up, you can transcribe it for them, and then they have a story of their own.
Yeah. You just reminded me of my childhood where I also had a hard time connecting with books and I used to write them.
Nice.
I was more of a writer than a reader.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, along those lines, this is sort of, getting into some of the same, but I'm very specific around gaps in current children's books. So what gaps do you think exist in current children's books when it comes to reflecting diverse mental health experiences?
The gaps when it comes to diverse mental health experiences, I think, unfortunately, especially if we're talking in terms of children's books, children and young adults, I just don't think there are enough books out there that truly address mental health, which I know kind of counteracts what I said, or contradicts what I said earlier, talking about just let them read for fun, let them read for joy. But I think it is important to have books that address mental health specifically. I visit libraries, schools, conferences all over the United States. Sometimes I talk to kids, sometimes I don't. But I found most often when I talk to school libraries and I talk to students, talk to teachers and try to actually engage them, talk to behavioral therapists, different people, the kids will actually say, are there any books about mental health? I talk about me writing books and they're like, well, are you ever going to write a book about mental health? Are you ever going to write a middle grade book about mental health? And I think because they want to see it addressed in the book, in the story, so they can see that journey for themselves.
Yeah.
Because I think oftentimes it's so hard for us to relate to one another and talk about our struggle. Even if we trust a person, it's hard to say, this is what's wrong with me. I'm depressed, I'm having severe anxiety. For kids, they don't know how their bipolar disorder manifests. They don't know what these different things look like. But if you put it in a book, they can say, hey, these characters are just like me. These characters have these eating disorders, and sometimes it's not even a part of the actual focal point of the story. It's just that the character happens to have these things, and I think that's when stories are even more powerful, is when it just has a character who just so happens to be in a wheelchair, who just so happens to be autistic, who just so happens to have these suicidal ideations or whatever it may be. And I think that's what we're lacking in literature, and especially in diverse literature, where the characters are not depicted as people of color. They don't have brown skin, they're not Asian, they're not LGBTQIA plus specifically in the narrative of the story. And I think if authors and illustrators can start telling those stories, I think we'll have so many more kids who are having like the positive aspects of mental health, because so often we talk about mental health struggles, and I know I'm preaching to the choir, but we talk about these struggles and talking about like mental health it should be a joyful thing. It's something that we want to protect our mental health as much as our physical health. And I think that's what we can do with stories if more and more people start writing stories based on their struggle, which is very much something I'm considering doing, talking about my struggles with mental health. But I think it just is missing because for so long, mental health has been so stigmatized for a very, very long time, and we're only just now being able to have conversations like this. So I think that's what's missing in terms of literature for mental health and diversity. But I think more and more authors, especially kids, are starting to be like, you know what, those stories aren't out there, it's time to write it. Penguin Random House, Scholastic, HarperCollins, Simon & Schuster, let's do this, let's tell these stories so we can show these people that they're not alone.
Yeah, it takes so much vulnerability to do that, right? And really break through these stigmas that we've had. I mean, mental health, you think mental health, and we forget that health is, the word health is in there, right? Like, be healthy, take care of yourself, self-care, right? I think so much of our society still focuses on self-care being a personal responsibility rather than a collective responsibility that we have to one another.
Yes, very much so. I think, and it's such hard work. I think it's hard work for me as a librarian. I see myself as an educator. I think it's hard from that perspective too, to talk about these things, to see not just kids, but to see kids, teens, and adults all suffering and struggling from these things. So I have no idea how both of you and your various teams of people can address what you do with behavioral health. So what inspires you about, as we're talking about the benefits of mental health, the joys of it, what inspires you about the work that you do?
I mean, I'm inspired by being a part of of breaking down that system, right? Of mental health being something that is stigmatized, mental health being something that, you know, especially in the Latino culture where we're afraid to talk about it because then you might actually be depressed, but the child already is that or already has trauma. It's already dealing with those things. As someone who, I mean, personally, I dealt with issues as a child in silence versus out loud because it wasn't part of my culture to seek support. So I think that inspired my work as a clinician. And even in my role now as a clinical director at CII, I really think of my work as building those systems that provide and support access to care that is culturally responsive, right? Like I get to be a part of creating those systems and making sure that that access is actually out there for our community.
Yeah, and I think of like the big ones, like being in the positions that we are, is being part of change. And I think that's where we do see the changes over time, where folks are more open to talk about mental health and behavioral health. You know, I can't tell you, like if I think about 10 years ago, my clients may not have shared that they had a therapist, and then these days my clients are like sharing with their friends, hey, I just saw my therapist, there she is, and I'm like, okay. You know, and I think that's the beauty about like seeing, being in this field for so long, is you kind of see the transformation change over time. And I think it does take folks to be courageous, to be vulnerable, to be willing to take that step, to be a part of the change, to be open, to talk about these things. And you know, and then I think that you have folks in this field who are just so passionate about being in the field, wanting to be part of systematic changes, to be supporting others. And that's the thing, is like, that is what inspires me, is the people I work with, and also just the clients that we work with, like their stories. I can't tell you how many times I hear stories, I'm just like, wow, like how brave and how much have you overcome, and still thrive and be successful. And those are inspiring regardless of what you hear. And so I think that's the beauty of like being in this field, is you're building relationship, you're connecting with people. And when you connect with people, you can't help but be inspired by people and learn from each other too.
And my question is like, what inspires you about the work that you do for CII?
Yeah, I mean, at CII, we really believe that children can reach emotional well-being and economic mobility, right? That's our mission. But if I take that down, break that down a little bit, it's providing these places of safety and connection, and that's how children will start to thrive, right? And if we can really focus on making sure that they have a connection, that they feel represented in the community, and really just understanding that what the children we are serving an underserved community in which so much is out of their control, right? Whether it be poverty, housing instability, immigration concerns, and we understand how that's playing into their ability to show up to work, to school, families, right? I also oversee our community schools program, and in that work, we ensure that schools are a safe place for children and family, and that they have their resources and needs met so that they can begin to heal and thrive.
Yeah, and then to kind of bounce off that, like with Children's Institute, our goal is building relationships, whether that's between counselor to child, within communities, you know, building a whole community, a safe community for kids, or even just higher up. And so I think the beauty of like relationship is that that's kind of where you develop safety. You know, it's about like being heard, being recognized, that your feelings are important, they matter, and we hear you. And that's the work we do, is really about creating that relationship, about building that safe space for the kids. And that really ultimately helps them develop like their social skills, the developmental skills, and then they are able to thrive in other settings such as schools, and as they get older, maybe workplace, you know, they might be employed. And so it gives us opportunities for growth later down the line.
I think it's so interesting that like CII's work and libraries works and educators works, they're so similar. I think we talk about safe places. We talk about change being beautiful. I think that's what we've seen over time, is we see so many grown-ups being more and more vulnerable as time goes on. I think you might be shocked to see how many messages I get on social media, how many times I'm asked in person, like, are you sure that my autistic child belongs in the library? Because I'm always bothering people saying everyone belongs in the library. And I think so many people think that autism doesn't count as everyone. They think that disabilities don't count as everyone. they think that their homeless kids don't count as everyone. I'm like, no, when I say everyone belongs in the library, it is everyone. I think that's where we're seeing this change, is where people are willing to talk about their stories, as we've discussed, and say, this is my fear because this is part of my story. This is who my child is. They're autistic, but they may not be able to use their library voice when they first come to the library or ever. And for me and many people who think the way that I do in libraries, I'm like, that's okay. Your kid is still a library kid. They can still exist in the library with their autism, with their ADHD, whatever aspect of them. They belong at the library. I would argue that they especially belong in the library. It's okay if they're going to shriek, if they have to stim away in the library, shriek away. I was a children's librarian. I was like, if they're making noise in the library, that means they're having fun. They're discovering the books. They're discovering what the library means for people. So yes, at a certain point, we are going to have a conversation about volume, but I've never shushed anybody in my entire library career. I've been shushed by library users, but I've never shushed anybody. I've had to say, can you take your phone call on the speakerphone outside? Maybe we can try to step outside for a minute, recalibrate, address what's going on, and then you can come right back inside. And I think all that takes the vulnerability of talking about behavior, talking about what's going on in our lives, getting help and assistance and just care and compassion from people like yourselves. And then they come to the library and they're like, oh, okay, this is a safe place. So it's saying that CII is a safe place, the library is a safe place, and all these places should be a symbol of the world where we should all have these safe places where we can be exactly who we are.
I love that. I love that because it's true. Libraries feel very different than they did when I was a kid. I don't know if I was going to the wrong library, but like you needed to be quiet.
Yes.
And now I'm at the library regularly with my children, and they're loud.
It is.
They're loud. Yeah. All the kids are loud, and they're having a good time.
Yeah, it's loud, it's messy. There's punk rock concerts at libraries.
Yeah.
There's WWE matches at libraries. I've been to. There's been local. I'm from Northern California, so the Russell has performed at the library. There's a kid rapper named Avery who's performed at the library. So the library is always going to have meeting rooms and spaces where it still is quiet, still is sanctuary, where you can take your meeting, where you can write your book, write your notes. But there are also places where it's like, so it's okay to be a little bit louder in the library these days.
Yeah.
That makes me like just allowing kids to be kids, right?
Yeah.
Because kids are not great, kids are loud, and that's okay. And
are.
I love the transformation of libraries being these safe spaces to be more inclusive, to
Yes.
recognize we can allow kids to be who they are. The play, the screams, and then also I think it eliminates a lot of the parents' fears about what do how do I
Yes.
bring my kids out to these environments
Exactly.
when they really want so much.
Yeah.
Kind of on that note, I'm kind of curious, like, what services can libraries or agencies like Children's Institute provide to support mental wellness? So you mentioned like these inclusive open libraries, but I'm also curious about maybe other thoughts of like mindfulness rooms or book clubs or the mental health events.
We're just finding ways to stir up the community, stir up the neighborhood to say, we have to find a way to support the library. And how can I help address just word of mouth at the library? How can I tell people that the library has changed, that you can be louder, you can be a kid, you can be a loud person in the library. Some people just have loud voices. There are people who just can't truly whisper. They're incapable of it. And how do you say that's acceptable at the library? But I think when it gets to specifics, I think it is things like sensory rooms, being able to just go into a room and just say, okay, I'm feeling overwhelmed, this is sensory overload, I need this part of the library to be for this section. But I think it's also just reaching out to the library and asking them directly, how can we help? What kind of programs can we do? What do you need from us? Do we want to work together to reach the homeschool community? Do we want to say, you know what, we know that we're having a real struggle with homeless kids in our community. There are so many kids who don't have access to homes, they don't have a home. How do we reach them while we don't embarrass them? And that's where your organization, libraries, can come together and have like a town hall meeting, have an honest discussion and say, this is what we need to be able to help. So I think that's the best thing that we can do as people, as groups who care, is just talk, is ask everybody, what do you need, how can we help? And not just like library administration and then CII, but like CII and the library kids. They're saying, hey, this is what we do. You may not understand a word I'm saying, but I want to hear directly from you. Because so often when we ask like, how can we help? We don't ask the kids themselves. And they may have some far-fetched ideas, but they'll still say it, and you can be like, okay, here's your dream scenario. Here, you just said, I want Lady Gaga in the library. I want Beyonce in the library. I want Chappell Roan in the library. And it's like, we may not be able to do that, but maybe we can find some impersonators to come into the library and help us work, and maybe we can put a mental health spin on it. But it all starts from having those initial conversations. But when it comes to libraries and mental health, it's having headphones for people who deal with sensory things, having fidget toys, because even a lot of those things, even though they may seem very inexpensive, for libraries, it's something that they don't have access to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because you talk about getting feedback from the kids, and the kids are like the ones who have the most creative and also out-of-box thinking that sometimes we get stuck in. And I know like in Children's Institute, like in our Otis Booth location, we created a sensory room because of the feedback we got from the kids, from the families, and that the kids needed a place to be able to like run around and play safely.
Yes.
And now we have such a beautiful room. And it makes me really just think about that and just how valuable feedback is. And also not just that, but we're in a community, right? And it's not just a partnership between Children's Institute and libraries or other organizations, but like we have to be a community to be able to support our kids. We can't do it all. And so it's so important to be able to really connect with others who can really along with us, create opportunities for kids to learn and grow and be themselves, because that's where we talk about behavioral health. That's what we do really well in Children's Institute, but also like connecting with medical practices, because they can address some of the physical pieces that are important for us to make sure we support our kids, libraries for learning and reading and so on. And so communities really become a really important part with helping our kids thrive.
I mean, I think the biggest takeaways I took in that were the power of partnership, right? What can I bring? What can you bring? How do we work together? And asking people what they need, right? Like what a powerful, what a out of the box thought. Ask people what they need. How can I help? And I mean, I think that we do that in different ways, right? Yep. Whether we do it through books and like what interests you, whether we do it when a child shows up to therapy and we meet them exactly where they're at. Why are you here today? Right? What's your understanding of why you're showing up for therapy today? And I think we all slow down and do a little more of just asking and exploring where someone is, and then bringing in our resources, right?
Yes.
There are so many out in the community that we can tap into.
Yeah, it's so vital. I think it's so important. Like you said, it's important to ask, and then to ask, and then to listen, and to take action. That's where that partnership piece comes in. Is saying, you know what, we're going to keep on having these conversations. It's not a one-off so that we can check the box. We're going to keep on showing up at the library, showing up at the park, and saying, yes, you are CII. This is what you represent. This is what you're trying to do, and you're going to keep on trying it over and over and over again until people believe you, until the kids, the families, the citizens know that hey, they actually mean what they say. It's not just lip service. They asked us a question. They weren't just listening so that they could take their turn to speak. They were listening. They repeated what I said. They took value in what I said. Maybe they couldn't do exactly what I wanted them to do. Maybe they couldn't make that happen, but they tried and they said, this is what we're going to try to do. And they're actually trying. Even if it takes them months, if it takes them years, they're still working at these campaigns to help behavioral health, to help kids, and to help families, which is so cool what you're all doing.
Yeah, showing up consistently, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's in small pieces and not exactly as one asked for, but doing our best to show up. It's so important. And people are so willing to help, right? And I think I'm reminded, unfortunately, during times of, big disasters, like we just had our wildfires in California, right? And how quickly the community comes together to bring what they have and what's at their disposal and willing to give.
Yes. Yeah, we're all neighbors, we're all helpers, and talking about help, talking to support, talking about what you all do. I was just curious from a behavioral health background, experience, perspective. What do you wish people knew more about behavioral health when it comes to kids and families?
Yeah, I think for me, it's that experiences and memories start very early on, even before kids can speak, even when they're infants and toddlers, kind of just trying to get food and get their parents' attention. But that experiences are ingrained very early on in the body. And I think that's something folks forget, is that that they think, they kind of associate memories and experiences with with words, right? And that when we talk about memories and feelings and experiences, we're like, hey, well, this is one of the happy experience I have. This is the sad experience I have. But they're oftentimes ingrained in the body early on before language is formed. And that's where you have both the positive and negative experiences are really learned. And sometimes it comes out unconsciously, like later on in behaviors. You know, like sometimes kids are like, hey, like, there's a noise or I see an image that reminded me of something, but they're not sure what it is and they can't tell you what it is, but it's something about that early experience that are there. And so I think early experiences are so important for kids and families. As we say, it's so important when you have with teachers or parents to read, to talk, to play, to interact with their kids, because all that gets learned and that relationship gets formed early on, and that carries the kid out for later on in life.
What you just said, Kelly, reminds me of, I forgot that I used to like to write books over reading them. As you were just talking, I had this memory of like 8-year-old me sitting there writing a book, right? And so, you know, to highlight what you just said, Kelly, it's there, it's underlying and sometimes comes out in the most unexpected moment. But I mean, I think something I would really like people to know about mental health in children is that it shows up in different ways for everyone, right? It can show up as a behavioral issue in the classroom, not at home, or vice versa, right? It could show up as silence. That's how it showed up in my childhood. It can show up in so many different ways. And I just think that there's so much work to be done to support children with the experience they're having, right? And not be so preoccupied with assigning a diagnosis or putting them within a box, right? It's like, what is your experience and what do you need support with? Asking, right? Yeah. Going back to that, asking somebody what they need and showing up in that way for them. I think there's so much value in just, you know, yes, diagnoses are there because they're super helpful. I'm not trying to get rid of them, right? Don't get scared. They're extremely important, and they give us a pathway to supporting a child. But to understand that sometimes it's the experience and what the child is presenting with. And then we have the other problem, right? And why we need our diagnoses so often is because then we also have communities who underreport. And that tends to be the community Kelly and I serve, where our children are underreporting, or it's so normalized that they don't really experience it or identify it as something that can be supported through a trusted relationship, through therapy.
Yeah, and I think that's why Children's Institute plays such a pivotal part, because we have staff who are trained to be curious with families, with the parents, to be like, okay, when we see a certain behavior, I wonder what that means, and I think curiosity allows us to explore the possibilities that are out there, kind of to wonder about how past experiences are impacting certain behaviors we're seeing now. And that's a part where it's nice to have someone who's that neutral party to be able to, for the parents to be able to kind of bounce ideas off, to explore, to wonder, to have a discussion and just kind of wonder about what's going on, and what are the things that we think is helping the kid, and what are some of the things that that we can also bring in to additionally support a child with growing too. And that's the beauty of the work that we do.
And sometimes that's a basic need, right? So, I mean, within the community schools work we do, so much of our work is to bring in basic needs, because without the basic needs, right, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're not going to get to healing. We're not going to get to processing trauma, right? And, Kelly also touched on our clinicians being so trained in, let me be curious. Does this child actually have ADHD, or is there an underlying trauma that needs to be addressed? Maybe it's both, right? But to know to ask those questions and address that.
I think it's so extraordinary and encouraging what you all are doing, talking about the support, talking about early experiences, talking about showing up, talking about diagnoses. Really meant a lot to me. That's why I love what you're doing at CII. I think I see a lot of it in myself as a library kid, as that homeschool kid. The kid who was always at the library, but was very shy around my family, so much so that I've only ever really been open with my mom, with my grandma, with my brother. I wish I had better relationships with some of my family members, but because of my struggles in life, it's always been like a twisty-turny type of relationship, just because I don't trust myself and I don't know what they're seeing. And I think it goes to what you're saying, talking about all these things that I wish I would have known as a kid. For me, my mom is Mexican, my dad is black. Two races that very much are just like mental health, doesn't exist. When it was fully stigmatized, it was even more stigmatized in Black culture and Mexican culture. You just don't talk about these things. You man up, you don't have it, and that's what I experienced a lot as a kid. And I think it's what led to my multitude of diagnoses going into adulthood. And even now, I think I've met with various psychiatrists, therapists, trying to determine if I am autistic. One therapist, one assessment has said I'm not autistic, and now I'm seeing another one because my therapist, my psychiatrist, left my provider because they didn't feel they were helping enough people. And now my current psychiatrist is like, hey, have you ever thought about getting assessed for autism? And I'm like, funny you should ask. It's like, what if I had known that as a kid? What if I had gone through that? And I'm not blaming my parents, but it's just like we didn't have these resources, we didn't have these tools, we didn't have a CII to reach out to and ask about going through those things if we were vulnerable enough to ask. So I see myself, and I think I am just one library kid, like a lot of other library kids, like a lot of library grown-ups who are struggling, and that's why I think it's so crucial that you all are present for so many families to be able to be the best version of themselves. And even if they're nowhere close to being their best version, you can help them work at it and just show them that they belong as they are, because you guys are working through those tools, through those different things to say, this is your possible diagnosis, but we're not even going to address that right now. We're going to work on showing up. We're going to work on this experience, which could be a trip to the library. I think that early experience of taking your kids to story time, taking your kid to go get a library card. For a lot of libraries, that rule of like you have to be 5, you have to be able to write your name to have the library card is a myth. That's just what that's what grown-ups tell their kids because they're just waiting. But you can get a library card as a baby. You can show up as a toddler, as a 5-year-old, 6-year-old, 7-year-old. And the library is like, this is going to be your early childhood experience. This is where you can see yourself. If you're shy, if you're kind of reserved, you can let your full self out because this is the library where you belong. We're going to say congratulations when you get a library card. We're going to sign it. We're going to do all these things to make it a treat, to make it an achievement. And I think that's what we're all kind of working at in different ways.
I love that you had such a wonderful early experience of libraries, right? And that librarians showed up for you in just the way you needed.
Yeah.
What's one book you'd recommend to families right now?
To families right now, I think I am very heavy. I'm a library person, so it's very hard for me to ever say one book. So I will cheat and I will say 2. I would say I think everybody at some point in their life should read The Giver by Lois Lowry. Maybe not at a very, very young age, but even as a kid, you can read Lois Lowry. That's why oftentimes if you visit a library, if you visit different library systems, you may see The Giver in the children's section. You may see it in the YA section, just depending on whoever ordered it. They may look at The Giver at different things, but The Giver is a book that makes you think in so many different ways. It makes you say, am I seeing the world as black and white? Is the world color? Like how is my mind spinning? What do I look at perspectives? What do I look at new people for? It's that book that like truly makes you mind blown the first time where you're like, what have I been reading? Yeah. What have I been thinking? So I think it's always The Giver, but then just a genre I think is graphic novels. I think it's the gateway to getting kids to love reading, to see the heavy illustrations, the artwork, and just the talent that goes into that. But that talent, those illustrations are there to highlight the words. And I think the more that families accept it, that graphic novels, comic books are real books, that their kids aren't cheating, the more they'll see, like in this literacy crisis, they'll see that it's okay to read these graphic novels because their kids are reading. There's so much thought. There's so much intellect that goes into graphic novels, comic books, manga. I can't read manga. My brain is like backwards. I can't do this. So I meet a kid who's hooked on manga, who reads One Piece over and over, who reads Naruto. I'm like, wow, do you know what kind of reader you are to do that? I have read thousands of books, and I have never been able to truly get through one entire manga. It's my bucket list item, is to get through a book of manga. So I think if families said, you know what, read graphic novels, read comics, read manga, we're going to see so many more kids who are not reluctant to read, who are wanting to read, who are like, turn off the TV. I want to read my manga. I want to read my graphic novel, because once they're reading all that, eventually they're going to find out what they love to read. They're going to keep on reading more and more and more. And they're like, okay, while I'm waiting for this next book, now I'm going to go read Wings of Fire. Now I'm going to go read Chronicles of Narnia. Now I'm going to read Lord of the Rings. I'm going to read all these different things because there's so many books coming out all the time. So I think if families can accept that it is real reading and something that should be encouraged, we're just going to see literacy at its best form ever.
I love that. Thank you for sharing that. Now you just have me thinking. Now I want graphic novels that illustrate mental health and
Yes.
those gaps,
Yeah.
right? Like what a great way that would be to
That would be
illustrate
amazing.
mental
Yeah.
health, because less words and more photo experiences.
Yes. Yeah, or even just plenty of words and still just those illustrations to match up
That
with
can,
it,
like,
with all those
right,
dialogue.
yeah.
But there's like you're saying, there's so many formats, so many possibilities to work on this mental health aspect through books, but also just that encouragement for them to accept themselves and to keep on going
Yeah.
one day at a time. And if they choose to stay one more day because of a book, as a library person, I love that even more.
I love that. Stay one more day because of a book. That's powerful. Yeah. I mean, thank you for answering that question, because I know we started this conversation by saying that the most important book is the one that speaks to you and like your
Yes.
interests, right?
Yes.
And then I asked you a very general question about what book every family should read.
Yes. Well, I have all sorts of books tattooed on me, so I always tell people, like, if you ask me what's my favorite book, what's one book person should read, I'm like, my arm is an example. I call it my reader's advisory arm. I'm like, I have this arm left for many more options. It's just, as a person who's read just a litany of books in 35 years, I'm just like, I can't choose just one. There's too many out there to give credit to thank for keeping me alive, for keeping me going.
Yeah, I think like with books, like it's sometimes you choose book based on where we are, right?
Yes.
Like sometimes if we're in a happy mood, we're wanting that like really happy adventure story in place, and then other times we may want a book where we can relate to the main characters through maybe some of the challenges and things they've been able to overcome, right? And other times we're choosing books to learn,
Yes.
right, for educational purposes. And I love the idea of like choosing whatever books calls to us, and that, it reminds me like that, like a lot of kids I work, like in my young cousins, like when they were young in like middle school, like all they were reading were like mangas, and they think of the mangas, I'm like, oh, I look at the library, and it was like shelves and shelves of the same the same series, and I think of how much dedication, creativity did that writer take to create a story that spans months and years. And I think of One Piece, where they've been going on over 10 plus years. I'm probably underballing this at this point in time, but they have over who knows how many mangas out there.
Yes.
And putting that all together is longer than a novel at times.
It is.
It's a different perspective, and something that such a welcome perspective as well.
It is, yeah. But even in this conversation that we're having, I think all that we're talking about, not all, but like the heart of what we're talking about is stories.
Yeah.
I think that's where like our work intertwines even more so. It's just like, yes, there may not be all these books, all these graphic novels, all these manga, all these picture books that strictly address mental health, various specific topics, but they're all telling a story. And I think that's what you all do in your CAI work all the time, is you address people, you address kids, you address family, and they all have their own individual stories, talking about writing stories, talking about illustrating stories, talking about reading stories. And that's where we see stories show up in all aspects, showing up in picture books, in juvenile, in graphic novels, in YA, in whatever it may be, and like talking about book joy, talking about library joy. I say that word and I talk about joy, but I'm like, you can have joy to read thrillers, to read horror. There probably is not much like joy and happiness in reading that, but sometimes we just need those books to read it. We need a break from what's going on in our life. We're like, you know what? I'm experiencing grief. I'm experiencing sadness. I need a thriller to distract me from what's going on. I want to see chaos in another character's life instead of my own life. And that's where we experience those things. And I think that's what the library joy, book joy is I'm talking about when it comes into stories. It's just like books are there for us. Stories are there for us. Just like mental health in a way is there for us through you all, and that gets into the positives and negatives of mental health, is saying it's still, your brain is always with you. It's always in there. It's always spinning a new chapter of your story.
Yeah, I think like the big thing with mental health, jumping on what you're saying, is that you're right, it is very much about creating story for the kids, but also like having the kids understand like what is their experiences and creating their own narrative around that. And I think that's the beauty of like understanding experiences. Sometimes you need time to be able to to tune in, to process, to talk about it, and sometimes re-talk about it to be able to understand. And then that really helps the person be able to create their stories, to say, hey, like, this is the chapter I am right now, and maybe there is some chapters I had revisit in the past I want to close, and explore, like, what are some new chapters they want to create. So the kids get to be their own creator of their own book, their own story, you know.
Yeah. I don't know if you knew that, but like one of our ways of treating trauma is writing a story.
No.
The clinician will sit with the individual and go through your personal narrative, your story of what happened.
Man.
Let's talk about it, but let's write about it. Let's draw pictures. I did that. I started at CII as a therapist, and I was touched by many individuals I served, but I will always remember the 4-year-old I wrote a story with, who sat there and wrote her story and drew pictures to her story so that we can process what she went through.
Man.
Yeah.
That's such a special technique. I think I've met with psychologists, with psychiatrists, with therapists so often since I first started getting therapy, to a point where I have a mentally ill circle of friends.
Yeah.
We're all struggling at different times, and one of my friends also sees various therapists and psychiatrists and the such. They've gotten to a point where they're like, I'm tired of telling my story over and over again. Can't I just create a PowerPoint and put it on a USB and give it to my new person so they can know my story? But I love the idea. I think from a kid, we should also be able to do that as kids, is be able to write our story with someone and discover new parts of ourselves to illustrate those things and say, you know what, this is where I was at this part. So I love that technique. I think I might tell my friend who wants to create PowerPoints of their struggles, maybe if you just write it out instead of put it on slides, maybe it'll help you as well. So I think those tools that you're giving to kids and to families are just as important for us adults as well.
Yeah. So we've been talking a lot about mental health and how people can identify and serve themselves, right? Kelly and I work with wonderful large teams of clinicians who are out there doing that work. So one more book recommendation from you, okay?
Absolutely.
Do you have any book recommendations for our staff to better support them as providers who are constantly dealing with vicarious trauma?
Yeah, I think that's so real. It's such a reality, unfortunately, for so many people who are helpers, who are going above and beyond to help kids, families, community members, and neighbors. And I think a book that comes to mind that is one of my most special books I've ever read is a book called Letters to You by Jazz Thornton. Jazz Thornton is a mental health advocate based in Australia, I believe, Australia or New Zealand. Not getting too much into her own story, because hopefully you read her story. Is she attempted to take her life 10 plus times. But she is still alive. She is going to schools, going to places, telling her story. She has an organization called Voices of Hope, where she's just showing people that they can keep on going. I think everything that I am as a mental health advocate, talking on and on about mental health, is because of Jazz Thornton. The reason I am still alive today when I've once tried to take my own life is because of Jazz Thornton. It's because of Jazz Thornton's book. And Letters to You is perfect for people who are grieving, who are experiencing anger, sadness, abandonment, burnout, trauma. It's a book that I recommended to my library team as a supervisor. I read a chapter of her book because it's just the Letters to You. Jazz wrote a bunch of letters to people at different stages in their life. It's saying, dear grieving person, this is Jazz. Dear forgotten person, this is Jazz. And just her notes, her affirmations to people experiencing those emotions, those feelings, and it's just so powerful. So powerful that at almost every conference I go to, I read a chapter from her book where she writes 50 Reasons to Stay, talking about sunsets, talking about a child in the room coming up to you out of all the people in the room, your favorite book, the future season of your favorite show, all those things. And I read it at these places where there are burnt out librarians, burnt out teachers, burnt out paraprofessionals at Head Start sites, and so many different things where these people are so extraordinary, so compassionate, such community helpers. But when they do that, when they do what you all do, you experience so much, because every negative thing, every struggle, you take it on to yourself. And I think when you read Jazz Thornton's Letters to You, you're like, oh, I did need this letter. How did Jazz know this is the letter I wanted? Is she writing directly to me? When did I have this interview with Jazz Thornton. And I think if you read that book at different stages in your life, it just does so much for your own taking on trauma, taking on grief, taking on everyday worries. So I hope that everyone reads Jazz Thornton's Letters to You.
That's an amazing recommendation. Thank you. I mean, we can have a whole nother conversation around burnout, right?
Oh,
Because
yes, absolutely.
it plays a role in being providers of
Yes.
mental health and continuing to do the work to destigmatize mental health, serve the population.
Yeah, and talking about what you guys just talked about, talking about your request for that book recommendation, I think it's so real that you deal with burnout, you deal with struggle as you do so much important work every single day. How can we as community members, as families, as kids, as people with and without kids, how can we help you all with the work that you're doing at CII?
I think that there are so many ways to give to Children's Institute, to CII, and that could be monetary donations because we do rely on that to keep a lot of our programs running. But I mean, if you have a few hours to spare and you can volunteer in some of our classrooms or different types of services we offer, and then, I mean, Kelly and I, we are, because of burnout, unfortunately, are constantly hiring. So, reach out to us. We are always looking for people who are trained clinically or paraprofessionals who can support the work we are doing. We are growing. CII is constantly growing, which is such a nice thing we've seen in the time we've been directors, because I oversee our non-intensive programs and Kelly oversees our intensive, and both our departments have seen so much growth and more need for paraprofessionals, more need for clinicians to go out there and do the work as we partner with more schools in our community. So, reach out.
Yeah, and the beauty of like Children's Institute is we are such a large organization. There's a lot of different employment opportunities, and folks don't necessarily have to have education in the field that we are. We will train people from scratch, and that's the nice thing is you can have a place where if folks are interested in helping others, this is a beautiful place to work with amazing colleagues who really are passionate and love the work that we do, and we love helping others. And also just kind of piggyback on that as well. Like, we have so many social media pages, whether it's Instagram or Facebook or YouTube. And so, if folks want to learn more about us or interested in the work we do, they can always, look at one of our social media pages too.
Nice. I'm a huge fan of Mr. Rogers. I bring Mr. Rogers up all the time, and he always said, look to the helpers. And I think Mr. Rogers will be very proud of all the help that you all do on a constant basis. And I'm so glad to hear that there's so many ways that we can all be helpers for Mr. Rogers and for Children's Institute.
Michael, thank you so much. This conversation was so fun. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about you. Thank you for talking so openly about your own experiences and, bringing up some of my own stuff that I relearned about myself. So thank you so much for having this conversation. If people want to find you on social media, can you tell them where to find you?
Absolutely. You know what? I think most of the time the easiest way to find me is just to search Michael Librarian. Even though Michael is a fairly common name, I tend to pop up if people search Michael Librarian. But I think the best way for people to find me and to help people like myself is to visit their local library, to support entities like PBS and NPR, public media, access to bettering yourselves. And I think now it would ultimately help me to also help Children's Institute. So I think I'm always just trying to help libraries, help schools, help teachers, and help anybody who cares about making sure kids and families can thrive as their best selves.
I love it. Showing up for each other.
Yeah, so thank you, Michael. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us and just talking about your experiences, being so vulnerable with us. And, I learned so much about just libraries and books and ways to connect with kids around readings and different books that are available out there. And so thank you for just giving the time and really talking about how do we support kids and adults with reading.
Thank you.
Thank you all for listening to our conversation today. To learn more about Children's Institute's programs and services across Los Angeles, or to make a donation in support of our 30,000 children and their families, visit our website at children'sinstitute.org. See you again soon.